Amen. First, let me thank Allah for being here. And I want to thank all of you for showing up. I always say that these events like this don't have weight without your presence. So thank you for showing up. And I want to thank Sound Vision, Imam Malik Mujahid for being so gracious to invite me, and also Zahir and Adil for inviting me to his home earlier, and his beautiful wife for all the delicious food that she cooked, even though I wasn't able to eat as much as I would have preferred. So I want to thank you for that. I'm so grateful to be here because just listening to the presentation that was given concerning Sound Vision, I was ignorant to a lot of what they do. We always talk about how information is power, and images are powerful. And just the education, the civic engagement, the teaching, not just among Muslims, but they mentioned earlier about the radio station and how it also influences and attracts non-Muslims as well. And this is the Islamic way, not just to focus on Muslims, but to broaden the message and continue to broaden. I tell that story often about when I met my dear brother in Boston, and every time I tell that story, people are fascinated by it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's one thing you didn't mention about, because your father was there.
Yes, he was.
Right. And another thing, and sometimes you don't, it was hard for me listening because, I'm not a person that like to cry, but he almost had me in tears back then, capturing that moment. But correct me if I'm wrong. And to us, sometimes it's even more powerful when we hear this because of the relationship that exists globally, that you hear about in the media with certain groups of people, that are at war with each other. But why don't you tell them? I'll say it, forget it. His father, I caught wind, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Denver Nuggets told me. As a matter of fact, his father that day when he was talking to me about him, and his father brought him there. But his father told me also, he said, we're Jewish. And I was like, whoa, that hit me. And out of all the encounters that I've ever had, even now I'm 49 years old, that one hits me the most because of, the stories that you hear. And just for him to be able to bring his son, even though he wasn't trying to become Muslim, but just to support his son was, I still think about that today. And that was just powerful for me. There's a saying, I know we're talking, before coming here, I was asked to speak a little bit about owning our own story. And I know I only have about maybe 20 minutes or so to speak, and there's a lot to cover, but I'll just try to begin. There's a saying that until lions become historians, hunters will always be the heroes. And also there's a saying that I think about often. James Baldwin had mentioned, he said that don't allow someone else's perception of you to become your reality. And I truly believe, I look back on my life as a young man growing up in Mississippi, and the power, information, it has the ability, and images have the ability, and as you already know, to benefit you in enormous ways or destroy you. And growing up, early on in my life, it was working towards, in some ways more so than not, to destroy me. I grew up, my mother had an 8th grade education. And it's hard for your parents to give you, actually it's impossible for someone to give you what they don't have. So at an early age, I grew up with this inferiority complex. I grew up looking at myself as being inadequate. And it wasn't until, and I'm going to kind of skip some things, but I ended up going through junior high school. I was put into a special learning class. I didn't think that I deserved to be put into that class. But they put me into the class. And I had a teacher that was kind enough, insightful enough to say, look, if you can prove that you don't belong, we'll get you out of here. So in 2-3 months, I was able to work hard, and I was out of that class. I ended up going to LSU. At LSU, prior to going, they assess you to see where they want to put you. And even though I could read and I could spell, but my comprehension skills were terrible. I couldn't recall stories. I couldn't pick out the morals to the story. I couldn't define words. I could spell words that I didn't even know what they meant. But they put me in a remedial reading class at LSU. And this is a guy you're looking at, he's on television. He's looking like he's for sure about himself. He's confident. But deep down, I had low self-esteem. You know, I really looked at, I didn't know, and at a young age, I felt that basketball was the only way out for me. That if I'm going to make it in life, if I'm going to survive, this is going to have to be the ticket. Because I didn't see academics as a way out for me. And that came from a place, not just the fact that my mother was miseducated, but it came from a place. And where did it come from? And I'm going to just share this with you. The damage. And then I'm going to go to the benefits of that information. I was born in 1969. I grew up in the 70s. So I grew up seeing the Ku Klux Klan walk on the beach. I grew up seeing the relationships that existed between whites and blacks, and how oftentimes when there was public communication, you know, black folks would put their head down, like they couldn't communicate. They felt fearful about saying what was on their minds, but in private they were very brave. And I saw myself as a young man developing those traits early, and I didn't like it. I knew it wasn't natural. I said, I don't like the way this feels, right? But it takes time. You don't change. You know, your environment has a way of molding and shaping who you become. The things you constantly see, the things you constantly hear as a young man, they mold you and they shape you as a human being. And so growing up, seeing all of those things, the Ku Klux Klan, not being educated by my mother, we also grew up in a time where some of you may know the movie or the shows, matter of fact, The Same. And you hear this day in and day out. There was a saying, if you white, you all right. If you yellow, you a good fella. If you brown, get down. If you black, get back. Like the blacker you are, the worse you are. You hear this day in and day out. Also, we used to see Tarzan, right? It's European ruling the jungle in Africa. Right? These are the images we used to watch, and I just learned this the other day. We used to watch Lone Ranger. And he used to always refer to a person indigenous to this land, the Native American or American Indian, whatever you prefer to be called, Tonto. And I just found out that Tonto is a Spanish word that means stupid. Constantly referring to him as stupid. So you grow up hearing and listening to these things. But also, there was a show called Sanford and Son and Good Times. Sanford and Son was about Fred and Lamont in a junkyard. I grew up in the ghetto of Mississippi. I know what it feels like not to have adequate, health care. I know what it feels like not to have adequate food and adequate clothing. So for us, when we were watching these films day in and day out, you see, we always wanted them to escape the ghetto, escape the junkyard. So every show, every single day that we're watching this program, it seems like they're about to make it out, and some kicks them right back in the ghetto. Next day you look and you're like, oh man, you get excited because if they make it, you make it. Because you living in those same conditions, it makes you feel good to see that somebody like you made it. But every single day it's like, oh, they're about to make it. And it just deflates you. Good Times, the same thing. James and JJ, about to make it. Some kicks them right back in the ghetto. I say that because I was at LSU. When I went to LSU, they asked me, they said, what do you want your career to say for itself? I said, if I can average 12, 13 points, 7 assists, I think it'll be a decent career. I'm small. I'm not a 6'9", a 6'5". I'm going to be playing against guys who are bigger, just as quick, maybe just as strong. gonna have to change my game. I thought it was reasonable, even though my vision was bigger. But sometimes you can't share your vision with people because they may think either you're arrogant to think so big, or they may try to talk you out of it. And so the first game I had about 12, 13.7 assists. Second game, I'm a freshman, I have 21. Coach stops me at the door. He said, we need you to score more. I said, I'll try, coach. My third game, I have 48. Fourth game, 36. Fifth game, national televised game. Laundry list of All-Americans. #1 team in the SEC. Playing them at their gym. The game is over, I have 53 points. The coach is shaking me. They want to talk to you outside. I go out, and they have as many journalists as we have people in this room, and they're asking me questions, and I answer them. But the thing that I remember almost the most is I go to the bus afterwards, and I'm looking out the window, and I start crying, like my mother had passed away. And I'm not crying because I'm happy. I'm crying because I'm scared. Because I'm crying because I'm saying, you know, this don't happen to people like me. I'm gonna get hit by a truck, plane gonna crash, something's gonna happen because this is too good to be true.